The first father of America, really, kind of, one of the fathers. But I stumbled upon a weird story, and I kind of figured I have to share this one instead, because it's just a little bit more interesting to me than looking at George's life. And so today we will actually be talking about a certain person that goes by the name Dr. William Thornton. And it was said that at one point in time he had the idea to resurrect Mr. George Washington from the dead back in the day. And so thought this was pretty interesting. We're going to take a look at William Thornton's early life a little bit and see what he used to study, and then go from there, and we'll talk about the story of how he wanted to resurrect Mr. George Washington. So, the story starts with William Thornton, who was born on Jost Van Dyke in the British Virgin Islands in 1759. He was sent to England for the education at the age of 5, where he was brought up by merchants and Quakers near the ancient castle area of Lancaster. He became an apprentice for about 4 years while there. Now, there wasn't much early recordings of him in his childhood and teenage years. So at this point we're nearing the end of kind of education. He's mid-teens when he became this apprentice, because people weren't really writing about their children's activities back in the mid-1700s. So we didn't really get a lot of written information about William until he started keeping his own journal during this apprenticeship that would last for about 4 years. And in this time, he would keep the journal and he would keep track of different flora and fauna and would draw surroundings, landscapes, and buildings and stuff. Because not only was he interested in medicine during this time of his studies, he was actually interested in architecture as well. So although his studies were in medicine, that's how he became a doctor, he would always go around drawing pictures of castles and other buildings nearby, taking in the influence from these buildings, and would kind of go on to be quite a successful architect. And we'll get into that in just a minute. So from 1777 to 1781, he would be an apprentice. And he would later end the apprenticeship and continue his medical studies at the University of Edinburgh. And he would continue to be invested in architecture while in Edinburgh. So he would take in the castles in the surrounding area and continue drawing them in his journal. Kind of taking inspiration. He might have changed some of these designs from castles in his notebook at the time. And in 1783, he would continue his education, but he would leave Edinburgh. He would actually end up going to London to continue his medical schooling a little bit more, and then would officially graduate from medical school in 1784 in Scotland, in the University of Aberdeen. Now, I really wish I was as lucky as this guy, getting to travel from country to country to country. This dude went to 4 different countries, or 4 different areas, to continue his degree and study, while I'm stuck here in one area doing my degree. I wish I could travel as much as this guy did. It actually sounds like a fun degree to go into, to be able to travel from London to Scotland, take in all these amazing views and keep track of landscapes and stuff. He wasn't really known for his artwork, although he did draw a lot of landscapes in his journal. He was more known for his architecture, which is weird considering his degree was in medicine at the time. Nobody really knows him as a medicine guy. It is until you get to this weird story. But after this, he would return home, where he was to receive his sugar plantation that his family had built up over this generation. It was very successful, and it was kind of what funded his college. He was supposed to receive half of the plantation, along with the 70 slaves that had worked on it at the time under his mom and dad. But he was very anti-slavery at the time. He did not agree with how the plantation was run and would refuse to take over half of the plantation. And would actually start doing some of the first anti-slavery movements as he would move to America and go to Philadelphia and try to get anti-slavery to go into America so we would stop using slaves earlier than what we actually did. Now, he did fail. He couldn't really get a whole lot of movement going in America at the time, which is a bit of a shame, but we understand why. America was very slave focused. It was kind of how we grew our economy at the time, and we didn't really have a solution for how to get away from it. And, you know, that solution would come later, although be a very bloody one. But he would also meet his wife while here. He would go move to Washington after his failed anti-slavery and would meet his wife Anna Purdue in 1790. Now, during the slave movement, he would actually meet up with James Madison as well at his home. Although nothing much would have happened between the two, James Madison kind of just saw his anti-slavery movement and was like, hey, that's pretty nice. You know, we might take some notes of that in the future. Although not much really happened. Now, he did have a lot of success as an architect. Like I told you guys, he took a lot of notes when he was over there studying for medicine. And he would take those notes and the designs and he would form his new kind of architectural design. And he would actually be chosen for Philadelphia's new city hall at the time. And it was thought to be one of the first modern classical styles to be brought and built in America. And he was also one of the first architects for the Capitol building over in Washington, D.C. Now, I have to say one of the first because there are actually 4 different architects at the time. His patent was actually selected by George Washington in 1793. So he's considered the first architect, even though 4 of them would work on it because his patent is what Washington wanted. And the other 3 architects would be Stephen Hallett, George Hadfield, and James Hoban. Now, James Hoban is probably one of the more recognized architects for this piece because he did the majority of the work after the other 3 being the last architect, but they would all pitch in and kind of form the Capitol and its government buildings. And he did a few other projects that are not so well known, so I figured I would just highlight these 2. But he did several architectural projects and is more well known for architecture than he is medicine. Now, we all know George Washington would later succumb to an illness after his presidency was over, and William Thornton would end up racing to Mount Vernon on December 15th, 1799, after hearing about George Washington's severe illness that he had at the time. And he believed that if his horse could get to Mount Vernon in time, before he would succumb to this illness and pass away, he would be able to save his life using his medical practices that he studied. Now, as soon as he stepped into the house, it was too late. Washington had already passed away. He was sitting there lying on his deathbed. Family was gathered around him mourning. You know, it was a loss at the time. But George Washington feared that he would come back to life and be buried alive. See, it was a very common practice back in the day to kind of just diagnose somebody as being dead, even though they might not have been. They might have just been in a comatose kind of state, and they would just bury them. Now, because this happened so frequently, they had safety coffins back in the day. You know, the old bell ringing. I'm sure you guys have heard that story a couple of times. That way, if you were to wake up while buried alive, grab a rope, you'd ring that bell. People would hear it, they'd dig you back up and be like, oh, you're still alive. I really thought you were dead. You know, because we weren't really far into our medical system as we are right now. People didn't really know when you were dead or not, because sometimes when you go into like a coma state, your heart rate and stuff slows down. You can't really feel it, so people just think that you're dead, even though you're not. So he would be laid there for a couple of days just to make sure he was dead, since he didn't want to be buried alive. Now, William Thornton, he liked George Washington. They were kind of close with him working in the Capitol and stuff and being appointed under Washington to kind of help out and everything. So he wanted to bring the former president back to life. And I have a quote for what he thought would have worked back in the day, when we both know that this probably wouldn't work at all, but he wanted to try it. So, he wanted to, and I quote, "first thaw him in cold water, then to lay him in blankets, and by degrees and by friction to give him warmth, and to put into activity the minute blood vessels, at the same time open a passage to the lungs by the trachea," I probably didn't say that one right, "and to inflate them with air, to produce an artificial respiration, and to transfuse blood into him from a lamb." Yes, you heard that right, from a lamb. That way Washington could get some warm blood flowing through those veins and get that heart pumping, get those lungs opened up. That way he could come back to life and lay out an eagle screech and go back to being president and what everybody wanted from him. No. It didn't happen, of course. Everybody thought that he was insane. The family wanted nothing to do with that idea, and I don't blame them. But he wanted to do it because it wasn't really about, the religious look at it, because if everybody's religious at that time and you don't bring people back to life, you just let them lay and rest. He looked at it from science. He's like, if I could bring somebody back to life, could you imagine the scientific breakthrough I would make? And it would have been amazing. But we both know you can't bring people back to life. It was a crazy idea. Thankfully, the family rejected the idea. And having been rejected on that, he was like, well, maybe the family will let me get him buried where I want him buried. So he then suggested, hey, how about we bury George Washington at the Capitol? Kind of where he should be. He was a big man. He did a lot for America. We should bury him at the Capitol. And they rejected that idea too, because George Washington really wanted to be buried at Mount Vernon at his estate. And that's where he lies today, not at the Capitol. He lies at his estate in Mount Vernon. Now, Thornton would go on a little bit to have a bit of a more career in the Capitol. He would actually take over for the patent office after George Washington's passing, and he would stay there for about 26 years. He would stay there from 1802 to 1828 when he passed away. Now, a lot of people label Thornton as an inventor, and he probably could have invented a few things. He seemed like a very smart man, but he was corrupt in the patent office and would actually often take credit for a lot of other people's inventions, one of those inventions being John Hall's breech-loading rifle in 1811. He would actually rob him of that invention while in the patent office. Now, like I said, he would end up passing away at 1828. He is now buried in the Congressional Cemetery in eastern Washington, D.C. A little bit of a weird story. I find it weird that somebody can go to school for medical history for about 10 years he would spend traveling from city to city, university to university, even be underneath somebody as an apprentice kind of, but still be known for your architecture instead. Just a little side study that he would love to do. architecture would be more of his claim to fame, and medical would be more of a weird story that we would tell later on about him trying to resurrect President George Washington. It's a little bit of a weird one. Figured I would tell his story first because it was something I've never heard about. You know, school never would have gone over this. It's a bit too weird and stuff. And I was like, man, that's a cool story. I'll share that one with everybody too as the first video. And so thank you guys for showing up for this story. I look forward to more future stories with you guys. And I will hope to have another video next week. I've already done some of the research for it. And like I said, if you guys have any suggestions, put it down in the comments. I would love to see what stories you guys want to hear and what history you could teach me by having me look up some of these stories. You know, I don't know everything. I could look at something like Alexander the Great. I've studied him a couple of times and still find something new. So if you guys have anything, let me know. And as always, make sure you leave a like and subscribe for future more history videos and history stories. Maybe we'll go over a couple more weird ones and a couple of funny ones in the future. But with that being said, I will see you all later.